Tonight's story comes from a woman who thought she was receiving late-night calls from an old friend. But when the past reaches out, sometimes it's hard to tell if it's just a memory or something more.
Hi GCS. Yes, you have permission to publish my story to your channels. About 6 months ago, I started getting these weird phone calls, always around 12:30 at night. I'd be asleep, of course, but my phone would buzz on my nightstand, waking me up every single time. The number was familiar. It was my old childhood friend, Sarah. We hadn't spoken in almost 20 years. I thought it was just some mix-up at first, you know? Maybe someone got her old number and accidentally called me. The first time it happened, I was half asleep and didn't even realise it was Sarah's number until the next morning. I didn't think much of it, honestly. I just figured it was a telemarketer or a spam call. But the second time I picked up, I mean, who wouldn't, right? You're curious, especially when it's someone you haven't thought about in years. So I answered and it was Sarah. I recognised her voice right away. She sounded the same, like we were still teenagers, you know? She said, "Hey, remember that summer at the lake?" It was such a weird thing to start with, but I figured maybe she was feeling nostalgic. I was half asleep, so I just went along with it. I was like, "Yeah, I remember. That was forever ago. How have you been?" But she didn't really answer. She just kept talking about that summer. What we did, the people we hung out with, stuff only she and I would know. It was strange, but kind of nice in a way. Old memories, you know? We didn't talk for long. She said something about how she had to go, but she'd call again soon. And then she hung up. I woke up the next morning thinking the whole thing was bizarre, but not spooky. Just, weird, I guess. So I tried calling the number back just to check. It rang a couple of times, but then went straight to voicemail. It was one of those generic voicemails, no name or anything, so I had no way of knowing if it was really Sarah. I got a little obsessive after that. I started Googling her, checking social media, trying to figure out where she was or what she was up to. Nothing came up. She didn't have any active accounts, at least, not under the name I knew her by. A few nights later, the phone rang again. Same time, 12:30. Same number. This time, I was more awake when I picked up. Sarah jumped right back into it, like we were still talking about that summer. She said, "Do you remember the night we sneaked out to meet those boys at the dock?" And I did remember. It was one of those dumb things you do as a kid that feels like the biggest deal in the world. But it was also personal. Nobody else would have known about that. I remember thinking, how could a stranger have all these details? I asked her where she was living now, tried to get her to talk about anything from the present. But she kept dodging the questions, just steering the conversation back to that summer. After a few more minutes, she hung up again. At this point, I was officially freaked out. I called the number back again, but it was the same generic voicemail. I even tried texting. Nothing. Then, about a week later, I got curious enough to dig deeper. I managed to find her mom's old address online and I drove by. I wasn't even sure what I was expecting, maybe to find out Sarah was living there again or something. But when I knocked on the door, an older woman answered. It wasn't her mom, but I asked if she knew what happened to the family. And that's when I found out Sarah had died. Years ago. Right around the time we lost contact, actually. Some kind of accident, but the details weren't clear. I stood there, just numb. The woman told me that Sarah's mom had moved away shortly after it happened. I asked about Sarah's old phone number, and she told me it had been disconnected for years. No one had used it since, but the calls didn't stop. That night, my phone rang again, 12:30 on the dot. Same number. I almost didn't answer, but I did. And Sarah's voice came through, just as clear as ever. This time she said something different. She said, "I wish we could go back there, to that summer." "Don't you?" I don't know what came over me, but I couldn't speak. I just listened. Then she said, "I'll call you soon," and hung up. That was 3 weeks ago. I haven't heard from her since, but every night at 12:30 I find myself waiting for the phone to ring. I know it's crazy, but I still think she's out there somehow.
It's strange how the past can reach out to us, isn't it? Some people say memories can be like echoes, playing back again and again. But what happens when the echoes have a voice of their own? Tell us, was it a glitch, a strange coincidence, or did Sarah really make one last call from the other side? We'd love to hear what you think in the comments below.